No one in the village of Kurotani could agree on exactly when he had arrived. Some of the older residents, the ones who sat now on low wooden stools outside their homes in the early evenings and watched the light leave the mountains with the patient familiarity of people who had watched it do so 1,000 times, said he had been there already when they were children. A still shape on the hillside above the cedar grove, present in the landscape the way the stone was present, the way the mist was present, not intrusive, not demanding, simply there, as if he had always been there, as if the mountain itself had decided, one quiet morning long ago, to take on the shape of a seated man and see what the valley looked like from that angle. Others were less certain. A fisherman named Taro, who had spent 60 of his 70 years on the same river that curved below the temple steps, and who knew the hours of that river the way some men know the hours of a beloved face, said he remembered the precise autumn the monk appeared, because the river had run unusually clear that year, clear enough to see the riverbed stones and colors you could not normally make out, amber and green, and particular deep blue that had no name, and he had felt at the time that the two things were connected, the arrival of the monk and the clarity of the water, though he could not have explained in any satisfying way how. What everyone agreed on, without exception, without the slight hesitation that people use when they are not quite sure of a thing, was this: they had never once seen him leave. He sat on a flat stone at the edge of the cedar grove, where the hillside leveled briefly before climbing again toward the mountain's higher, rockier reaches, and the stone was large enough for him and no more, shaped by some older and more patient agency than human hands into something that resembled, if you came upon it from the right angle, in the right light, a low seat placed there deliberately, as if the mountain had known, long before he arrived, that someone would need it. He sat in the full lotus position, or something so close to it that the difference was invisible from any distance, his robes the color of charcoal and deep water, his hands resting in his lap with the composed stillness of objects that have forgotten they ever moved, and his eyes. This was the detail that people mentioned most often, the detail that stayed with those who climbed the hill path and found themselves, almost without meaning to, slowing down as they passed him. His eyes were open, not watching, not unfocused in the glazed way of a mind wandered elsewhere, open in a way that had no simple name, a quality of looking that seemed to take in everything before it, the cedar grove, the valley below, the river's silver thread, the village smoke rising in the still morning air, the hawk turning its wide, unhurried circles above the ridge, without fixing on any of it, the way still water takes in the reflection of everything above it, without choosing one cloud over another. A young girl named Hannah, who was 7 years old, and therefore still in possession of the particular courage that allows children to ask what adults have quietly decided not to, climbed the hill one spring afternoon while her mother was occupied with the drying of persimmons, and stood before him for a long moment, studying him with the frank and total attention that children bring to unusual things, and then asked, in the clear voice she used for important questions, what he was looking at. He did not startle. He did not blink. He turned his gaze toward her with the same unhurried quality with which a sunflower turns toward light, not urgently, not with the self-consciousness of someone caught in a private act, but simply and completely, as if her arrival in his field of awareness was neither surprising nor unwelcome, as if he had known she was coming and had been quietly ready. He said, in a voice that was lower and softer than she had expected, like the sound of water moving over smooth stones at the river's shallow bend, "I am looking at the place where the mountain becomes the sky." She looked. She looked very carefully, the way she looked at pictures in the books her father brought from the town on market days, tilting her head slightly, narrowing her eyes against the afternoon light. "There is no line," she said finally. "It just becomes." He smiled then, and it was not the smile of a man who has been told something he already knows, but the smile of a man who has heard something he wanted to hear again, and hearing it again from a new voice, has found it still true, still good, still worthy of the smile. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly it." The seasons moved over him the way seasons move over stone. The summer brought its long, humid heat, the air above the cedar grove trembling slightly in the afternoons, the cicadas building their great, shimmering wall of sound around him, and he sat within it the way a stone sits within a river current, present and unmoved, the sound flowing around and through him without carrying him anywhere. Occasionally, a monk from the temple, lower on the hill, would climb the path with a small tray, a bowl of rice, a cup of water, sometimes in the autumn a few roasted chestnuts wrapped in paper, and leave it at the edge of the flat stone, and when he came back later the tray would be empty, returned neatly to the path's edge with the careful placement of a man who did not wish to inconvenience anyone. The autumn came, and the maples on the lower hillside lit themselves in the particular extravagance of red and gold and deep amber that Japanese autumns are known for, a beauty so concentrated and so brief that it has, across the centuries, inspired more poetry than perhaps any other single phenomenon, and he watched it without writing anything down, receiving the color the way he received everything, openly, without grasping, without the particular pain of a person who knows that beauty is leaving and cannot stop it from leaving. Mono no aware, the old poets called it, the gentle sadness of things, the ache of transience. But looking at him in those autumn afternoons, the light coming through the maple leaves and moving across his still, unhurried face, you might have thought that for him the sadness and the beauty had become the same feeling, indistinguishable from each other, two words for the same current of the same ancient river. The winter arrived and the snow came, and this was what the village watched most closely, with a mixture of concern and something that was not quite awe, but lived in the same neighborhood, the snow settling on his robes and on his shoulders and on the top of his head with the indifferent equality it showed to every surface, to the cedar branches and the stone wall and the old temple roof and the flat stone beneath him, treating him as it treated everything, as simply another part of the landscape receiving winter, and he sitting within it, his breath rising in small white clouds that dissolved instantly into the cold air, disappearing the moment they appeared, gone before you were sure you had seen them. He never appeared cold. He was never discovered in the morning hunched or contracted against the freeze. He simply sat, and the snow sat on him, and eventually the snow melted, as snow does, and the stone beneath him was dark and wet, and the cedar grove dripped quietly into the returning silence, and somewhere below in the valley, A single temple bell marked the hour with a tone that traveled up the hill and arrived at the flat stone, already softened, already half dissolved by distance, like a thought that becomes a feeling on the way to its destination. The question the village could not let go of, the question that surfaced at the evening fire, at the market stalls, in the quiet conversations between neighbors pausing on the bridge, was not the question you might expect. It was not, who is he? It was not, where did he come from? It was stated plainly and returned to again and again with the persistence of a river returning to the same bend. What does he know? Because there was something in the quality of his sitting, something in the particular stillness he carried that suggested, not certainly, not loudly, but with the quiet insistence of a thing that does not need to announce itself, that he had arrived at some understanding, had passed through some door that most people sensed the existence of without being able to find it, and was sitting now in the room beyond that door, patient and undemanding, waiting for nothing in particular, lacking nothing, complete in the strange and enviable way that very few people ever manage to be complete. A merchant who had traveled widely and seen many temples in many provinces, who prided himself on a practical and unsentimental turn of mind, climbed the hill one market day with the specific intention of asking the monk directly, "What is it? What do you know that makes it possible to sit like that?" He stood before the flat stone, and the monk looked at him with that quality of open, unfixing attention, and the merchant opened his mouth to ask his question, and found, to his considerable bewilderment, that he had forgotten it. Not lost the words, forgotten the question itself, forgotten why it had seemed so urgent, so necessary, forgotten even the shape of the lack it was meant to fill, because standing here, on this hillside, with the cedar scent around him, and the valley spread below and the sky above doing the slow, unhurried thing it always does toward evening, he found that the question had dissolved, the way the monk's breath dissolved in the cold air, gone before he was sure he had been holding it. He stood for a while in silence. Then he sat down on the ground at the stone's edge, not intending to, simply finding himself there, his legs folding beneath him with the sudden comfort of a man who has been walking for a long time and has unexpectedly found a place to rest. He stayed until the light left the valley. When he climbed back down the path, the other merchants asked him what the monk had said. Nothing, he told them. Then what happened, they asked. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his own hands in the evening dark. "I think," he said slowly, "I understood something, but I cannot tell you what it was." The years continued, 40 of them, some said, counting back to the oldest memories of the oldest residents. 40 winters, 40 thaws, 40 cycles of the maple's red extravagance and the cedar's patient green, 40,000 mornings where the mist came off the valley and moved up the hillside and gathered briefly around the still figure on the flat stone before dissolving into the warming air. Hannah grew up. She became a woman who taught the village children to read, who knew the river's moods better than almost anyone, who carried in her adult face something that people who had known her since childhood sometimes called a quietness, an unusual quality of not needing to fill the silence that she had had since she was small, and that seemed, over the years, to have deepened rather than diminished. She climbed the hill regularly, as she always had, and sat at the stone's edge for an hour or so, not speaking usually, sometimes exchanging a few words about the season or the quality of the light, and then descending again to the village and her life there, carrying something back with her that she never attempted to name. On the morning of the 41st year, a morning in late spring when the hillside plum trees were still holding their last blossoms, white against the blue, each one trembling slightly in the early air, she climbed the hill as usual and found the flat stone empty. The indentation where he had sat for 4 decades was still there, a slight smoothness in the stone's surface, a barely perceptible cupping, as if the stone had slowly over all those years accommodated itself to him, had learned his shape and held it. Around the stone the cedar grove was entirely still, the air carrying nothing unusual, only the scent of pine resin and the distant river and the last of the plum blossom, sweet and already ending. She stood for a long time. Then she sat down in the place where he had sat, on the stone that held his shape, and she looked at the place where the mountain becomes the sky, that borderless, nameless threshold between one vast thing and another, and she sat with it, openly, without grasping, and the morning moved around her, and the cedar grove breathed, and far below the river continued its quiet, unhurried conversation with the stones of its bed, carrying the melt of the high snows down toward the sea. No one came looking for him. No search was made. No inquiry raised. The village seemed to understand, in the wordless way that villages sometimes understand the things that matter most, that he had not gone anywhere that required finding. He had simply, at last, become the mountain. Rest now. Let the cedar grove breathe around you. Let the valley hold you as it has held 10,000 quiet evenings. The stone is here. The sky is here. There is no line between them. It simply becomes. And so do you, gently, into sleep.